Hi everybody, welcome back to Between the Lines. My name's Julian, I'm an obsessive reader and used book collector, and today I'm not talking about books. If you've been following the channel, you maybe know that I'm also a filmmaker and videographer, and along with reading and fantasy and science fiction, one of my great passions and loves in life is movies. And not only just watching and absorbing and expanding my horizons in movies, I actually make them as well. I've made plenty of shorts and a mid-length movie, and I actually got to go to LA to screen that movie. So I've been doing this for a little while, and I thought, why not introduce one of my other passions onto the channel just to let you guys know a bit more about me and discuss something that I absolutely love as much as books. And so I thought a great way to kind of introduce this topic onto the channel and to all of you is to talk about my favorite directors, my top 5 in a ranked order from 5 to 1, 5 being my 5th favorite director and 1 being my absolute favorite of all time. And this will hopefully get you to understand a little bit about me and my tastes when it comes to movies, and maybe even find some common ground and directors that you share admiration for as well. And just be aware that while these directors are incredibly well known and well received, only 2 of them are American actually. A lot of them are from other countries and were big spearheads in foreign film. They're not quite the most relevant or modern directors, but they're the ones that I love the most. So coming in at number 5, we have one of 2 American directors on this list, and the only one that's still actually making movies, and that's David Lynch. So David Lynch is a very popular director. Plenty of people know about him, but if you don't know much about him, he brought a lot of surreal and experimental aspects into popular filmmaking, starting off with more experimental avant-garde stuff like Eraserhead, and then moving into bigger, more conventional works, as conventional as this could be, but the original Dune from the 80s, and to a more blend of very interesting but also well-regarded and well-known movies like Blue Velvet, Mulholland Drive, and Lost Highway. I absolutely love his style and what he brings to storytelling and filmmaking. David Lynch being a person who, for the most part, writes and directs his own movies while not necessarily writing all of them, definitely has a part in the writing process. And his movies have such a unique stamp of his creativity on them, blending that surreal, fantastical, creepy nature with them to really grounded in dark and relatable human emotion. And I think that while his movies are maybe considered super out there or crazy or weird, they really strike an emotional chord with me. Like, you can't go in and watch The Elephant Man and tell me that you didn't get emotionally devastated by that movie. It's so sad. And that pervades even his more out there or experimental or weird movies, kind of like Mulholland Drive, which is a movie that's definitely in my top 10 movies of all time. That movie is so out there and weird, but it affected me so emotionally and so deeply that I just can't get that movie out of my head. And the first time I watched it was like a fever dream. It was so intense and raw, but very ethereal. He's also responsible, or at least partly responsible, for my favorite TV series of all time, that being Twin Peaks, that he co-created with Mark Frost. This is my favorite TV show ever. I absolutely adore Twin Peaks. That classic first season with the murder mystery aspect and the weird surreal stuff that David Lynch brought to it. That was all so great and captivating and amazing, and the characters are so well defined, and Twin Peaks as a location is so rich and deep, and it was very interesting learning about the dark underbelly of this seemingly quaint small American town. And stretching into the sort of uneven second season, which was a lot longer and a little bit hard to get through, but it was all worth it for the 3rd season, which came back in 2017 for Twin Peaks: The Return, which was maybe the best season of a TV show, and I would even consider it one of the best visual media pieces that have come out in the last 10 years. Twin Peaks: The Return was an absolute triumph and something that I hold really highly as one of just the best pieces of film and TV I've ever seen. And just like the rest of his filmography, Twin Peaks isn't necessarily for everybody, but it struck such a deep chord with me, and I absolutely love the weird aspects of it. So David Lynch, that's why you're in my top 5. Number 4 on my list is Ingmar Bergman, the Swedish-born director, famous for directing a lot of movies. This director's filmography is absolutely huge, and he directed so many movies over the course of his decades-long career, but you might know him best for directing the movie The Seventh Seal, which is probably his most widely regarded movie in terms of an international audience. What I really appreciate about Bergman's movies is how really deeply they get into the human condition and emotion without being super loud or obvious about it. There's a lot of understatement, and I think his collaboration with cinematographer Sven Nykvist has probably created some of the most beautiful images ever put to film. And some of his works have really ranked highly on my favorite movies of all time, movies like Wild Strawberries and Persona. But I think out of all of his works, my favorite two are the ones he actually did for TV, which are sort of TV shows, but not really because they're very limited and made kind of as a movie that were split into multiple parts, that being Scenes from a Marriage and Fanny and Alexander, which I think are two of the best pieces of visual media, just kind of like how Twin Peaks I consider like just a great movie. These were also great movies that happened to be distributed in the TV format, but having seen these on Blu-ray and seeing how beautifully they were shot and made with the purpose of making them as a movie, not necessarily as an episodic TV show, they're just absolutely beautiful and stunning movies and among my two favorite of all time. Number 3 on the list is Akira Kurosawa, the Japanese director most famous for his samurai epics. That's probably what you know him for too, making movies like Seven Samurai and Rashomon, but his filmography is huge as well, and he made a lot more than just the samurai epics, even though I absolutely love them as well, and a couple of those are just stunning, beautiful masterpieces of cinema. I think I appreciate more so the color samurai epics that he made a bit later in his career, that being Ran and Kagemusha. Those being some of his first forays into color cinema were just absolutely gorgeous triumphs of filmmaking. Those movies are some of the most beautiful I've ever seen, and some of the most gripping and harrowing and brutal as well. These movies really didn't hold back. And while he's mostly known for those samurai movies, his other films in the other genres he's dipped into were absolutely amazing as well. We have his forays into noir movies, kind of like The Bad Sleep Well and Stray Dog, movies that were definitely stylistically different from his samurai films, but still great nonetheless. And we have his forays into literature adaptations, although that did kind of cross over into his samurai films. He did adaptations of Shakespeare, in which Throne of Blood was an adaptation of Macbeth, and Ran being an adaptation of King Lear, and also more dramatic adaptations of stuff like Dostoevsky's The Idiot and Tolstoy's The Death of Ivan Ilyich, which was made into Ikiru, which is just a beautiful and sad but absolutely heartwarming movie. And overall, probably my favorite action director. The man could direct action like no one else at that time. He just revolutionized so many things, and I think a lot of the action sequences and kind of the dramatic storytelling within that action still even holds up today and is definitely super watchable if you're into that stuff. Number 2 on my list is Andrei Tarkovsky, the Russian-born filmmaker who is definitely the most poetic and ethereal on this list, but the one who has probably had the most direct influence on my own work as a filmmaker as well. Me and my cousin are filmmaking partners. We direct our movies together and for the most part write them together. We do make a range of stuff. We've made mockumentaries to just comedy shorts, all the way to experimental, more poetic stuff that are definitely Tarkovsky inspired. This man, I think, only made 7 feature films in his career, but every single one of those is a masterpiece and a gorgeous work of both writing and poetic storytelling and a visual representation of that as well. Although you may not be familiar with him, you may be familiar with some of his work, probably Solaris. That's the most widely known, I guess, for an international audience of his movies. That was also readapted based on the book the original was based off of by Steven Soderbergh in the early 2000s, so that's probably the closest Tarkovsky connection a lot of people have. And he also adapted the book Roadside Picnic into the movie Stalker, which of course also inspired the Stalker games, which a lot of people are very familiar with. But the work of Tarkovsky is very different from the work it was based on and the further things that were kind of inspired by it. I think Solaris might be my favorite of his work, which is a sci-fi movie and was kind of made as a response to a sci-fi movie I'll be bringing up in my number 1, where Tarkovsky thought that movie was very cold and distant and wanted to make a more human, kind of rough and dirty, poetic interpretation of the science fiction genre. And Stalker, I think from a visual perspective, has inspired the most of my work, just with the kind of camera movements and the production design and the art design. All of that has probably the most profound effect on the work I do when I try to strive into that more poetic side of filmmaking. A lot of his work also had to do with faith and religion, and while I'm not the most religious person myself, I do really appreciate how well he handled the subject and how deeply and profoundly he really tackled faith and the human condition, and never did it in a way where it was super loud or obnoxious, but in a way that was truly trying to understand what our our purpose is as humans and why we're here and how we can strive to be better people. And number one on my list, my favorite filmmaker of all time, the person that really made me want to become a director, is Stanley Kubrick. I should say, while he is my favorite, the ranking of Kurosawa to Tarkovsky to Kubrick is like this close in between each of them. Like they're all right up there, but Kubrick for me was the one that really switch something on in me to be like, oh my god, I need to make movies. For a lot of directors on this list, we could say they have a certain style and kind of MO when it comes to their movies. And while you can also say about Kubrick, you know, he does have a distinct visual style that you can pretty easily identify, he never stayed too closely in one genre or one method of storytelling. He always wanted to do something else and do something more. And I think his attempts to do that in different genres and methods of storytelling really made him the best, because he did everything and he did it the best. This guy has made some of the best war movies of all time. He's made Paths of Glory. He made that one. Yeah, that movie is incredible. He made Full Metal Jacket, and he made Doctor Strangelove, which leads into some of the best comedies of all time. The guy made Doctor Strangelove. That movie is absolutely hilarious, and it's so different from both Paths of Glory and Full Metal Jacket. He made the best science fiction movie of all time, according to me, my favorite movie, 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is the movie Tarkovsky kind of rejected and made Solaris as a response to. But I think that movie is the peak of cinematic just mastery. The visuals in that, the storytelling, the way it starts off so small and then goes into the biggest, most grand explorations of humanity and where we're going as a species is just so profound. And this is a movie I've been lucky to see in 70mm projection twice, and every time I see this movie, it just blows me away again and again. He also made my favorite horror movie of all time, The Shining. He also made incredible period pieces like Barry Lyndon, which is a movie that a lot of people sleep on, but I think it's really underrated and probably the most beautiful of his movies. The way it was shot, he took a lot of inspiration from paintings of that era, and is a lot funnier than people realize. I think that movie is explicitly really funny, and I think a lot of people might miss that. And of course, Eyes Wide Shut. I know a lot of people are kind of weird on this movie. It's a movie that came out within the last 20 or so years, so it's still relatively in people's minds. It's not like an old movie like something like Paths of Glory or Doctor Strangelove, where it's so far removed from today's consciousness. And it's a little strange for modern audiences. It's not the most straightforward movie, but I think it's an absolute masterpiece and something that is very hard to explain without watching it. And I don't really want to say much about it, but I think this is another one like Barry Lyndon that a lot of people slept on because it wasn't as grand as some of his other movies and a little less accessible, but just an absolute beautiful thematic masterpiece that I think is going to hold through the test of time. And he's a person who every aspect of their filmmaking has intention to it. There's nothing that is said or done or shown on screen in a Kubrick movie that isn't done without purpose. And this comes down to kind of, you know, the stories about him being super meticulous and doing a million takes and forcing actors to do things over and over and over again. But I think that was to find the right intention for the scene and what was put on the frame. And I think that's why he's the best of all time. So that's it. Those are my 5 favorite directors. I hope this little tangent away from books wasn't too much of an aside and that it was still a bit interesting. I will go back to talking about books for my next video, but for right now, let me know in the comments if you also like some of these directors, and if you don't, let me know why not, and also let me know who your 5 favorite directors are. So before you go, remember to like and subscribe, and as always, thank you for watching. Please remember to support your local library, and I'll see you next time.